Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. All right, Roan, we are back for another episode.
Man, it's always good to be with you in the studio. We started early this morning.
Yeah.
I see you didn't have time to do your hair.
Well, you're like the old man in the sea, like age is your alarm clock. And I'm like, I set my alarm and I'm like, I know Roan probably didn't have to do this because we're not getting together until, just before the sun comes up.
I'm old, I have to get up and I have to pee.
I was just about to ask, what's your morning routine like?
Yeah.
It's like a lot of shuffling.
Yeah, a lot. Shuffle, trinkle, trinkle. Yeah, that's how that works.
That is awesome. Look, this episode we're pretty fired up because believe it or not, you do have friends, and some of them are long term. And
it's amazing.
A few have been willing to have a conversation with you. This episode is a conversation between you and a friend. He's becoming a friend of mine, Eli Machen. This guy has a lot of smart things to say.
Dude, Eli, I always say I'm pretty stupid, but I'm smart enough to surround myself with good people, smart people.
That's why I'm here.
I affirm that. Yes. And so Eli, we've known Eli for many years. He's been a mentor and friend of ours, and the experience and wisdom that Eli has is just, it's a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I always just love hanging out with him. I think I say it in the episode, it's like hanging out with Yoda and Gandalf or something, but man, he is pretty amazing, and some of the things that even in this episode that he talks about are so insightful. And that's just because of the years, I think over 40 years of doing this work. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's got some stuff figured out. One of those things that surprised me in this conversation, not to tease out too much, but he makes a statement that he sees more divorces occur not over sexual acting out, although, that's there and maybe a catalyst for pursuing help. He sees more divorces happen over lies and secrets than the actual acting out. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's one of the things we talk about is just this idea that the spouse can handle the truth, but what they can't handle is the deception. And it we talk about gaslighting. That's one of the biggest factors in whether the relationship is going to survive. But boy, that it's like you can't handle the truth, to quote Jack Nicholson. But the reality is they can handle the truth. It's the deception that takes them out.
Yeah, because it just compromises an environment of safety. So I'm excited for our listeners to be able to hear this pretty extensive conversation about what it's like to be the betrayer, what it's like to be betrayed, and how to regulate as a couple after that, and just investment in your own health. So without further delay, here is a conversation with Eli Machen.
We have a very special guest and dear friend, Mr. Eli Machen. Eli has been around in this counseling world since Methuselah, I think. I don't know, Eli. You're not quite that old, are you?
No, he's a few years older than I am.
But you did know him. So,
yes.
Man, I just, for our listeners, Eli has done about everything you can do in counseling and therapy world, from running inpatient treatment centers to doing intensives on a national level, and is known nationally and internationally for the work that he's done. Truly one of the pioneers in our world of kind of sexual addiction, sexual brokenness, and partner work. Eli really is one of the first people that really began to develop work with partners, and that's when we use that term. That's um, the spouse of a someone that has betrayed, and so the partner is the spouse of sexual brokenness in whatever form that takes, and it takes a lot of different forms. And Eli was one of the first therapists to really begin to focus in on what we now know as betrayal trauma. There wasn't a whole lot out there when Eva and I got into recovery in 19. There was nothing on there. Nobody was working with the partner, and we suffered greatly because of that. So Eli's work has been just certainly fundamental in beginning to help couples heal, and certainly helping partners heal because of working with betrayal trauma. And I always say Eli's like it's like hanging out with Yoda and Gandalf. Um, and he's not quite as short as Yoda, and he's not quite as old as Gandalf. So he's somewhere in between those two. Eli, glad you're on the show with us this morning. Thanks for being here, man.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ron. And this is a topic that's close to my heart and obviously my work for many years. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Yes, always, and it's just always great to hang out with you in whatever setting we're hanging out, whether that's holding fly fishing rods in our hand and fishing on a river or on the ocean, or just I don't know, fishing anywhere. It's just fishing. And so hanging out with you on our podcast is just as much fun. So the thing that we're going to talk about today is just this idea of betrayal, and the spouse, and how does a spouse heal from betrayal, and this betrayal trauma, because we say it in our book, we say it all the time, but there's no greater crisis level in a relationship, certainly in a marriage, where there's some form of betrayal of a sexual nature, um, and we say it is the greatest crisis level in a marriage, uh, possibly, certainly, the death of a child would be there. But this betrayal trauma and helping partners heal from that, Eli, is just it is a crisis level, and there's a lot of emotional dysregulation that's occurring. Everybody's spinning, and man, just just on a basic level, when you are dealing with that kind of right out of the gate, what would you say? I mean, just kind of the first step when that person shows up in your office, or in your work.
Well, first, I think that normalizing what the spouse is going through mentally as well as emotionally. We know that our thoughts drive our emotions. And so, helping them to understand that the reaction to being betrayed, gaslit, lied to, deceived, and living a life with someone that life was not real in their minds as to what they thought happened as opposed to what really did happen with the person who betrayed or gaslit and knew all along. And that's the big confusion, Ron, in the marriage. You said this is a big crisis in marriage, is because the one who did the betraying always knew. So it's very hard for them to be empathetic because their brain, and what science is showing us today, is that the lower part of the brain, has a perception of who we are based on our experiences of our external world. So there's that implicit knowledge, like I know how to ride a bike, and the explicit knowledge is I know what a bike is. Now, when those two don't match, the brain goes into panic because our brain desperately wants confidence in knowing. And so when a partner suddenly wakes up one day and realizes that the person they've been married to is not who they thought, the life that they've lived is probably not real, and or at least the relationship part, and that they're now not real sure who they are, and that's the mental dilemma that the brain goes through, and all the panic, and so then the emotions that follow that, and so that's so keep in the dynamic of the relationship. The portrayer has no clue why this is the so. I just talked to a young man, or he wasn't that young, but a man yesterday, 2 days ago, had breakfast with him. And he says, "Oh well, I've told my wife everything, and she's fine now." And so, all right, he says, "Well, yeah, right." And I didn't go any further with the conversation, but the deal is, no, his wife is not all right. She's still suffering, and that the lack of understanding of what she's got to go through in rebuilding her own trust in herself. Do I know, or is what I know real? And so this is the basic. I try to. So I'd be sitting there talking to that partner that's in my office, and I say, okay, the biggest and most important job you got right now is trusting yourself, trusting that what you see is real, what you hear coming out of somebody else's mouth is real or not, and that inner polygrapher inside you, your spirit, your human spirit inside of you, is registering truth or lie, and that's the big step.
It's always difficult when the betrayer has come clean, even done disclosure, passed a polygraph, and then the partner is still like in this space, kind of stuck. I can't trust you. I feel like there's more. You're not telling me, and they'll they'll talk about that intuition, and the betrayer he's like, I've told you everything, and then she's still stuck, and in her gut, her intuition, her spirit is telling her he hasn't been honest. um just how what do you do when that's in play?
Well, first of all, I say don't trust him.
Amen.
However, I follow that up with saying, okay, determine what it's going to take for him to earn it back.
Yeah.
And so that's a long and arduous process. Sorry, anybody out there that's a portrayer and hearing this, because that takes a long time to build that back up. It's a fragile foundation and easily fractured later by misrepresenting something, not following through with honesty and rigorous honesty, and things that don't line up for the spouse or partner is like all of a sudden they're up and they're back at square one. See, I can't trust you,
Oh yeah.
and so bottom line is that with the man, it says, okay, are you willing to earn her trust or his trust? And so whoever is the betrayer, say, are you willing to earn that trust back? Then I start building and says, okay, what's it going to take to earn that? And then I tell the partner, all right, then now it's your job to allow him to earn that trust. You don't have to trust him, but are you willing to allow him to build that trust? And then it's up to the betrayer to decide if he's going to do that, or he or she's going to do that kind of work.
Yeah,
Um,
when doing these podcasts, and even when even I in writing the book, it the terminology is always tricky because not everybody that goes and acts out is a sex addict, and not every guy that looks at porn is a porn addict, and just like with this, it's just the terminology. It'd be easy to say that the addict, but the term betrayer is, I think, probably appropriate because it's not always addiction. I always tell people, and I've heard you say it too. I don't have a hammer, looking for a nail, because I work in the arena of sexual addiction. Um, and so betrayer and the betrayed one, that's just our terminology. And then I think what you're talking about when the spouse and typically I'll just say that that's in my case that's a woman, a female spouse, because men are just not as intuitive. Um, and one of the things Eva is telling her, we're telling her, is to you have to begin to trust your gut. You've got to trust that instinct. Um, However, it's not always 100% spot on. And so, as you said, it's like you've got to be willing to take the risk to trust again and being open to it and watching what he does. And I think we're probably just going to use in our just for our talk today, the man as the betrayer and the woman as the betrayed one. It's just easier as we kind of talk this through, but certainly it can work both ways. Um, but you've got to be willing to take the risk to trust again, to allow trust to be created. And I always say the work of the betrayer is he's got to create safety before trust will ever come. And it's, as you said, I often I look at the guy and I go, dude, you got to be willing to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And I'll ask them, how long have you been acting out? You've been doing something in your marriage for that amount of time. It may take that amount of time for her to heal. Are you willing to do what it takes?
It's a lifelong process of, am I living in truth with that person that I live with? And truth will always come before safety. And without safety, there's no trust in the relationship. So there's two dynamics that I say, are you living in rigorous, transparent truth? And I call it just being buck naked with your partner. And it is everything that comes out. Because I've seen more divorces over the lies than the actual any kind of slips, relapses, or whatever else.
Gosh,
I'm
that's so
yeah,
true.
and the reason for that is that if I don't know the truth, then I don't feel safe. If I don't feel safe, then I'm not going to trust you. And so a lot of times I go to this is what's going to create safety. A lot of times, partners, betrayed partners, will look at me and says, "I don't know." And so part of their job is to say, "Okay, what's you determine what's going to be safe for you." I don't care if it's finances, raising the children, infidelity, whatever it is. What's going to create safety? Because if you don't get safety and you don't get trust, you're not going to have vulnerability or intimacy. And I think that's the way God has built us all to pursue that. And so, working with the betrayed partner and however they've been betrayed is that, how do we get to a level of truth? And like you were saying earlier, how do I know I'm hearing truth?
Yeah,
Well, it's like maybe you need to accept and verify, whatever. But make sure it is there, and the proof of the burden of proof is on the person who betrayed, not the spouse or partner that got betrayed. And that's the big difference. It's like a lot of times you've worked with them too, is that they get into this hyper vigilant investigation because they got to know the truth. Well, as long as you do that, you're never going to trust the other one anyway, because you're going to say, well, if I hadn't been doing all the research, all the investigations, private eye stuff, then I won't know. Well, you'll never be able to trust that person. So finding out for you what the burden of proof on truth is on the portrayer, and then what's for the partner, what creates safety for you. And that's important. It doesn't matter what the betrayer thinks is safe. It's like it's for the person who's been betrayed. What is safety for you? And then Ron, like you're saying, trust can be built on that kind of platform. The longer I feel safe, the more I'm going to trust me. I'm going to trust what I know, feel, intuit, think, whatever. And so the safer I feel, the less anxiety I have. The less anxiety I have, the less I'm going to panic. If I panic, then I become a petulant 6-year-old working with the lower part of my brain, which is not very smart, and it's usually filled with anxiety.
Yeah, and it's not going to end well.
No,
That the Hebrew word for trust, literally means safety and security. So safety and security are the just that's the foundation of trust. And I tell guys, and I think just from a practical standpoint, I think it's easier to understand, and even you can get more practical with this idea of, what does it mean to create safety for your spouse? And I mean, those are the practical things like, communicating, and I'm going to let her know where I'm going. I'm going to let her know what I'm doing. If my plans change, I'm going to inform her of that. And I mean, there's a ton of ways, very practically, in to create safety, and certainly in working with men. Men, we need a list. Give me a list. I can do these things. But when we're thinking about some kind of existential concept of trust, I think creating safety is just much more practical.
yes, absolutely. And it lowers the anxiety within the relationship. So I know that somebody who has betrayed struggles with the fear that if I'm truthful and you really knew who I was, then you wouldn't like me or you'd reject me. And so the concept of living a false life or living in secret or living without full disclosure is feels safe. And yet I've been doing this for 46 years. I've never seen it work that way. It's always, I'll disclose who I am. You know who I am. This is where I do, like you were just saying earlier, everything. I live transparent. And if I know that I'm accepted and loved at that level, I mean, there's no need to hide. I
Hmm.
now feel safe and I can live in truth. And I think that's the dilemma, that if I tell you the truth about who I am, you won't like me. And I believe that's a lie.
Yeah, it, that that's the thing that certainly keeps uh, us betrayers, which I are one. Uh, that's the thing that keeps us kind of bound up, in our shame. And so much of the acting out behaviors, shame driven, for sure. There's a shame core there, and then that kind of manifest in the healing process is going victim, um, because it's like, we've been at this for 3 months. she, Discovery happened 3 months ago, and she still doesn't trust me, and it's like, I'm like, dude, you're just being a victim. Man, you rocked her world. You changed everything, and somehow you have this expectation that yeah, you've come clean. It's been discovered, and now she's just supposed to be all good and hunky dory. That goes into that victim mindset, that certainly, on the betrayer side, that piece is always in play. And so, in working with him, I've got to work on, and too. It's just like, man, it's moving from kind of the idea of moving from victim to hero, and I'm learning to love my spouse well, and man, that's the journey on the betrayer side, and then being able to hang in there when things get tough, and they will get tough. This process is messy.
And I believe it's character building. I mean, betrayer betrays because of a lack of character. And then on the other side, as a partner, and I speak as that from my life, is that I lacked character in the sense of trusting myself and trying to live and learn in peace. I mean, truth. I think there were times where I probably knew truth. I just didn't have the wherewithal to lay down. But I couldn't even spell boundaries, much less use them. Oh, it's like, I didn't know what they were. I like a calf looking at a new gate. What's a boundary? You mean I can say that? I can do that? And so it was a lot of character development in my own life, in recovery and the therapy and the intensive work that I did to bring character in my own life that I could stand at the show up place and be trust my authentic self. That either you like me or don't like me. And if you don't like me, then I'm not going to die and I'm not going to wither away. I'm fine. And that's a huge growth process on our side. Is that who am I going to be, or what am I going to do if this person doesn't stay with me or leaves me? And that's a character growth on my part as a partner that realizes that I'm going to be fine.
Yeah. When you talk about boundaries, I always know I know it's going to be at least you knew there was a word called boundaries. You may not have known how to spell it, but when I'm sitting with a guy and he starts talking about these barriers, like I'm, I'm like, are you talking about the highway department barrier? What are you talking? He doesn't even know that there is a word called boundaries. He's using barriers. And I just go, boy, this is going to be a long process. So you knew there was a word, you just couldn't spell it. You were ahead of the game. But that boundary work is so fundamental. And really, I believe, and I know we're on the same page. And this idea of boundaries, it really is about my character, about my integrity, about my values, and who I am as a man. So often people think that it's like somehow I've got to set a boundary on you. And I think it's just more about the idea of like, these are things I will accept. These are things I will not accept. These are things that I will do. These are things that I will not do. Um, and and I'm going to live out of that value system, which is my integrity as a man. And setting boundaries is I think problematic, um, because you can set boundaries all day long, and chances are if you're in a relationship with somebody that's unhealthy and doesn't even know that there's a word called boundaries, they're gonna blow right through that, and then you got to be prepared, to follow through on whatever it is that, okay, this is who I am as a man. And if this happens, this is what I will do. Or this is who I am as a woman, same thing on the other side of the fence.
Earlier in my recovery, I heard somebody wise and somebody who mentored me over the years say to me, Eli, he says, no one has ever achieved the more intimate a relationship, the more boundaries exist. And it's like, because
Mm.
without boundaries, there's no safety. So if I don't know where I stop and another begins, if I don't know what's going to create safety for me, then I'm never going to be willing to be authentic because it's too scary. It's too frightening. And so part of the deal is that as I learn to establish more boundaries in my life and in my relationships, the more intimacy I get to experience because I can show up authentically and be safe. And I think that's really key in the sense that there is intimacy, there's a direct correlation between intimacy and boundaries.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, 100%. I'm just curious. I think you and I've talked about this. Maybe you, Eva, and I've talked about this. One of the things we tell couples that boundaries are more individual to like who I am as a man, who I am as a woman, and then in the relationship, it's more about agreements that we have. And we often say, well boundaried, healthy people, they keep their agreements. So it's connected to boundaries for sure, but it's more about, these agreements that we have to have in order to have a relationship. And so I'm just curious. I think we've talked about that. Agreements versus boundaries, and certainly the more intimate a relationship, the more agreements you're going to have. It's like I have an unspoken agreement with my neighbor don't come, get my lawnmower out of the garage without asking me. I might let you use it if you're a pretty good neighbor, but might not. But you gotta, the agreement is you gotta come ask me. And then, those are unspoken agreements. But like in the long-term marriage relationship, well, there's lots of agreements. And so it's just that idea of agreements versus boundaries. Um,
But Ron, they're not necessarily. You remember the green triangle thing that I use
oh
with
yeah.
couples? It's not versus. It means that there may be times where it's like, okay, I'm not going to remain in a relationship where you don't stay honest with me.
Yeah.
Now, that's a boundary, but it's also relational because if you stay in the relationship, you're going to agree to maintain that honesty.
Yeah.
If you don't agree, the relationship's not going to make it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so bottom line is there's also that you move from boundaries to negotiate and look at options. Is you can stand there and negotiate. Say, well, what if I say that I'll be honest with you within 24 hours? We teach that, you know that, and so I've got a 24-hour window that I've got to be honest. I've got to come clean with you, where if I'm sober or if I'm being honest or whatever's my life, you're going to be updated every 24 hours. Now, that's a negotiated thing. You sat in your office with couples over and over and over and done that.
Oh yeah.
And so there's that combination of on the green triangle, which if somebody out there wants to see that, it's a YouTube channel, Show Up 365, and it's conflict how to work through conflicts. You'll see the triangle. That's all free. But bottom line is that you work in a healthy relationship, an adult relationship, by navigating between boundaries, negotiating, looking at options, and ownership, responsibility. And so, it was what you were saying earlier. I've deceived this person. It's my responsibility now to build that honesty back, to build the trust back, to live transparent with integrity.
Yeah. And I like how certainly frame that. It's like it's boundaries, and agreements, and they're really, they are certainly tied together. It's a both and kind of thing with boundaries and agreements. I mean, they just go hand in hand. So when in just working with a partner, and they can get in those stuck places, and this idea of triggers, and so often, boy, it's like they'll get stuck in that place, and just kind of continue to spin. And certainly on the other side of the fence, man, it is a frustrating endeavor, when there's just a kind of this constant, instead of asking for reassurance, it moves into an accusation. They've got this story in their head, that you've done this. And so how do you help a partner kind of move beyond that?
Well, we'll go back to what we said earlier, Ron. Part of that, when we don't have the full story of whatever's going on in our world, our brain fills in blanks. We fill in the blanks that we don't know. And so in the early days, the process is that usually the betrayed partner has filled in a lot of horrible, maybe a lot worse stories than what really took place. So it's our job now as we begin to go through that timeline of memory that we have. You've sat there with partners where they have got an incredible timeline in their head of what happened here, what happened there, what's back. I mean, they'll take you back 20, 30 years. Bottom line, though, is just what they're trying to do is to remove the story that's not true and fill it in with what is true. And that's a process. And the anxiety that a partner goes through is the normal process of the brain trying to find confidence in what you know. And that takes time. You're fighting against the way God has created our brains to feel confident in what we know, because throughout history of humankind, what we didn't know usually killed us. So those of us who are still left, genetically speaking, are those who felt pretty confident in what we knew because we're still here.
Yeah, I remember somewhere in my training along the way, I read It's just, there's so much now on the brain and brain research. It's I think the final frontier. We figured out more in the last 10 years about the brain than we knew since time began. But one of the things that I came across, and it's okay, the hippocampus in a woman's in a female brain, is and the hippocampus is, as you were, we're talking about the base part of the brain, the limbic system, and that's where the hippocampus is. And in a female brain, it's twice as large as that of a male brain. And the hippocampus is where memory and emotion are stored. And it's like, boy, I read that. I think I threw the book across the room and probably cussed because I'm like, oh gosh, she's right. That argument that we had 10 years ago, that thing that happened, she can remember where we were, what I was wearing, what she was wearing, what I said. Oh my goodness, holy cow. And so I think often in working with, female partners, you know, that hippocampus is, memory and emotion. And, when there's this betrayal trauma, well, now you've got, supercharged memory and emotion. And that's one reason I think it does take, it just as I've heard you say, just it takes time, tears, and talking, and lots of it. And boy, it is certainly a process.
Now, Ron, we're talking about how this is so laborious and time consuming, but I also want us to kind of really encourage the audience to realize that to be able to live in a sense of mental safety, that you can trust what you know, or if you don't know how to set up a boundary, do be safe. And that level of self-confidence is is worth every step you take along this difficult journey, because that confidence is more in self and what you trust in yourself than anything else. And I think that that's really key if we're talking to partners. Oh my, I'll never get you. You can get there whether your partner, your betrayer, is ever honest.
Boy, that's so true.
There's a lot of hope. Now we're talking about a lot of work, and yes, but you know, eh, eh, mental health is a commitment to a lot of work anyway. And so
Yeah.
you can choose to live in fear and anxiety if you want, or do the work and live in confidence in what you know. And what I know is what I know. Now, I can be wrong, but I'm going to be wrong in what I know. I don't want to be wrong in what you tell me.
Mm, boy,
So
that's good.
that's confidence. And we've been taught that kind of dynamic to if we hear it preached from the pulpit, or we hear it taught on a sermon, or we hear it taught on radio, that we're supposed to believe it. And instead of teaching us that no, you're on a journey to learn to trust your own intuition, your own sensitivity to the spirit, and that you can walk in faith, because and integrity, regardless of what the other does in your life.
Yeah, and
I think that's
that's
out
that's
part and betrayed.
yeah, and boy, that's such a great point, Eli. This, and there's so much hope in doing this work because what certainly we don't advocate divorce. We fight hard with couples to try to make the marriage work and all of that. But there may be times where it's time to pull the plug. To stay in a relationship where somebody's continuing to act out, and I mean that's abusive, and it's a horrible, miserable life. Um, but if we do this work, man, that pays dividends for the rest of our life. And even if we do the work and divorce happens, man, we're gonna be a much wiser, much more aware person out there. In when we're looking for that next spouse, man, we're gonna realize that all those red flags are not necessarily a carnival, right? We're going to actually know, what those red flags are, and we're going to run for our lives because we've become aware and we've grown. and we know who we are, and we have boundaries, and all the dividends, all the everything that comes out of that, from the development of our character and who we are, and our security and our boundaries, and all the good stuff. I think that that's what Jesus offered us. That abundant life that He talked about, and but it is available, and if we do the work, man, we can actually experience that.
Well, Ron, not only that, but as you know, with your children, I know with my son, who you'll be with fishing this next week or so. He has gained so much from my failure, and setting boundaries and all that, and learning, watching me walk through recovery, even sitting in some of my 12-step meetings with me, is that he's seeing, the fruit of that hard labor over years. And so, today now he's going into counseling himself, and a lot of that has to do with the hard work that he watched me struggle and go through, and my mistakes and failures, leaving him with a legacy that's far greater than what I got when I was his age, if that makes any sense to you. So,
Oh yeah.
so the payoff as to what we're changing generations down the road is it's unmeasurable. It's immeasurable. So it's like, not only do we live this abundant life you're talking about, but we're giving a legacy to our children and our children's children of a healthy way of living.
Yeah, it really is. All of this is generational work, and man, I'm just so excited that Eldridge is going to join the fold in the counseling world, because he'll be a good one, and we need good ones. That those are I always tell people, finding a good counselor is like finding a good plumber. You need to ask around. Don't just look in the yellow pages. Oh, there I go, man. That's one of those. Yeah, that's one of those old. Yeah, Ben's over here. He's shaking his head. I'm old. Eli knows what yellow pages are. You don't just search the internet. Yeah, you actually ask others, and you ask the counselor. Tell me about the work that you've done. To Because to go sit with somebody that has learned this stuff in a textbook, you're probably actually going to be worse off in going and working with that person. So, man, Eldridge has lived it in watching you and learning from you, and just how you've modeled it. And I'm fortunate too. My oldest son, Ro, is a counselor, works with us, and he always says, he's been in recovery since he was 4 years old. so, and he's 36. So yeah, he's lived recovery, with with a mom and dad, yeah, doing their work and all that good stuff. It certainly wasn't, not always perfect, and we went through a lot of hell, and they experienced that. Both of my sons, Ro and Josh, and however, the thing that they've done is, they've both done their work, and and when we all get together now with their wives, our daughter-in-laws, and our grandbaby, our 2.5-year-old grandbaby daughter, and we got another one coming in December. But man, when we get together and hang out, there's nothing greater, because of just there's no secrets in our family. There's nothing that can't be talked about. It really is just kind of the idea of freedom. And man, we have a blast. And so, it's just this work will pay dividends. This investment, it is generational dividends. That's for sure.
You said something wrong about we certainly didn't do it perfect. I don't know that a child or any family member really, really expects perfection. I think that they really respect you, and your children really respect yours and Eva's determination to stay at it. I mean, I'm not giving up. I'm gonna keep working at this. It's nothing about perfect because that has given your children hope, or they wouldn't have gone into counseling that they're doing or Eldridge. So it's like I've never been perfect. But I might fall on my face, but my son and my wife saw me get back up and go at it again. So it's like I think that sends confidence, a message of confidence and trust that I'm not going to trust that my dad or mom are doing it perfect, but I am going to trust that they're going to keep going at it, and if I keep seeing them get back up and go at it, I can trust that.
Man, I think that's I think that's just the key to even this idea of recovery. We always say that recovery is simply, I'm recovering the life that God intended me to live when he decided to make me, right? And life happened, and we got off track, and now we're back on track, moving towards living that life that He intended us to live. And I do believe, man, that's what Jesus talked about, that abundant life, and boy, all the good stuff. Is the great Kenny Chesney, the theologian Kenny Chesney, sang the good stuff of life. Man, that's where it's at. And so I think it's worth every step. It's worth every penny. It's worth every amount, every uh, minute that we spend, doing this work. And it's hard, but boy, it's so worth it. So, Eli, just before we wrap up, man, just talk a little bit about this, like the idea of like empathy on the betrayed side of the fence, for the one that they've betrayed, because that's one of the things that I just hear so often, and I see it. It's just very little empathy and kind of joining with that other person's world that you've destroyed, and being able to move into that. I know you and I talked recently, and one of the things you're doing with some of the betrayers is just this idea of, I think it was ownership and empathy, and just talk a minute for uh, kind of how you're working with that.
Sure. I think that, first of all, as a therapist, I'm recognizing the fact that if somebody lacks the ability to be empathetic to their betrayed spouse, that most likely they're not sober minded. Now, whether they're sober and they're acting out or not is a different story. I think that they can be that way, but I'm going after the sober mindedness. Now, that's a point where someone is learning to live. They're living a life where there's lower anxiety, they're connecting in a community. Now, the thing about going to a 12-step meeting is pointless about what you hear. It's pointless about the readings they do. That is so secondary to the main reason is that you're going to that meeting and your brain is saying, here's some people that's got the same story that I do. And your brain heals because it's that Me Too factor. I'm not talking about the Me Too out there this today, but it's like,
Yeah,
I get it. Somebody here gets me. And you're not going to get that from your partner early on. And so beginning to get that connection and saying, here are guys that understand my struggle. Here are people who get me. And that's empathy and it's healing. The second thing is that have they worked enough for their program to be sober minded? In other words, are they living in their adult brain above that 6-year-old petulant brain that's below the reticular formation? And are they living in their adult brain? And if they are, they have the capacity for empathy. If their anxiety is so high that they've dropped down into the lower brain, that part of the brain does not have the capacity for empathy. It doesn't care about anything or anybody. That part of the brain, as a matter of fact, the amygdala will shut down every organ in the body so it can live longer. So it's like, so you're thinking about empathy, it'll even kill off your organs in your own body. So it's the first to come online, the last one to go, unless somebody blows your head off. Now, so that dynamic is that okay, if they're struggling with empathy, their level of anxiety is really high. And I go after that with, okay, let's do some things that's going to lower your anxiety and fear the way you live in life. So that peace passes all understanding. We keep your heart, your emotions, and your mind, your thinking in Christ. And it goes on to think on these things. So I said, what are you thinking about on a daily basis? And so go there. It's in the mind. What are they doing with their head? Are they sober minded?
The cure for what ails us, it is connection. And if a guy gets connected in a healthy group and begins to share and talk, and he begins to experience chronic exposure to love and acceptance, and that shame begins to heal, that's the path of healing. And I loved what you said. It's not the content of any group. It's one reason, in my groups, I don't do a workbook. I don't do a book study. I may bring something and talk about it, but the goal in these groups that we do, it is truly intimacy, and that can wig people out. Well, I thought you did men's group. uh, it is, and the idea of intimacy is just simply knowing and being known. And that's why we always say this thing that we're facing in this betrayal and infidelity, it's always an intimacy disorder. And the only way that that's going to heal is you've got to begin to practice it. And the best way to practice that is in a safe group with others that have had similar experiences.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.